use cases here that were kind of interesting that came out of all of this. One was this. This was a technical writer where the employee was actually getting ready to leave and take another job. And so he was copying all the data he could out of the company in advance of leaving the company. And we saw that he copied in excess of 100,000 files. Now, the employee was fully authorized to access this data. Okay? If you'd gone through a user rights management project, or I've lost the term I'm looking for, but you would find that this was data that the employee had access to and should have access to because of their job. They needed access to this data. The operation took time. It took 3 weeks. You don't just copy 100,000 files, in an afternoon. And so it took some time. Each copy operation copied a few thousand files. Some of the copies were in the middle of the night or on the weekend. And so that also raised a little bit of a red flag. What we noticed trolling through the log data and processing through this log data was we noticed that neither the employee, this specific individual employee, nor any of the other employees in the department ever copied this large amount of files. Now, the thing that was difficult here is that we think, well, okay, so let's, in our security product, let's put a rule in there that says any copy operation in excess of X number of files, raise an alarm or block it, something like that. Well, couldn't figure out where to put that threshold because every once in a while, one of these technical writers working on a big project and says, you know what, I need every document that we've ever written that referenced the following product or the following technology for the last 10 years. And there would be one massive search and copy and download operation. But then it didn't happen again. And so you couldn't say, no, you can't copy more than 10 files, because then people can't do their job. The problem was that this employee was doing these massive copy operations, but over and over and over and over again. And so that was, we didn't have any rules that would block that or identify that, but looking at it over time, we noticed where there were some real outliers. We also noticed that nobody in the department, including this employee, ever worked nights or weekends. And yet, some of the copy operations were happening at night and on the weekends. And so that was a bit unusual. But it wasn't until we were able to look at all of the log data and start running some algorithms on it, some machine learning on it, where we were able to find this information. The employee was authorized to access the data. Okay? Here's another one. This is where we found a DBA that was abusing privileges. So typically what happens is, the DBA would access the database through a database tool, through a thick client. This happened to be Oracle, through an Oracle client. And there was logging on the database. In other words, as with a lot of organizations, doing their best practice and due diligence was enforcing logging for privileged user access. So he said, well, DBAs are absolutely fall into the category of privileged user, and so let's log all of their activity so that we know what these users with all these powerful accounts with elevated access is doing. Well, so this user just went through the application. Well, the application has, typically we say, well, the application has its own built-in controls. The application only allows you to do certain things, okay? Well, this rogue DBA knew that yes, if you go through the application, you're limited in what you can do. But if you just use the application account and go direct to the database, you've bypassed the application, because you're not using the application, and you've bypassed the logging that's enforced on privileged accounts, because you're not using a privileged account. Okay? So, bypassing all the logging and all the native logging built into the Oracle database. Again, what we noticed here, this was from external database activity monitoring. This is called a box and whiskers diagram, for what it's worth. And we see here, this is the user's access here, the records that this DBA downloaded, 4.5 million records, and we see in the box all these other little dots are the number of records that other DBAs were accessing. And so when we looked at this activity compared to all the other users in the same department or users with the same access, we find that it's way out there. It's a definite outlier. So then we compared this to just to the individual user, and we say, okay, what has this user ever done in the past? And we saw, well, it's still an outlier. Okay, it's still way out there, beyond what we would ever expect to see or what we'd ever seen in the past. And so that's what raised the red flag. Again, you know, this was a DBA, so they know their way around the database. They were using an application account. There was no failing of any login. There was no violation of permissions. It just, you know, the application wouldn't have allowed the download of this many records. It would have raised all kinds of alarms if 4.5 million records were coming out through the application. But by taking it out directly, it didn't raise any red flags. Of course, if the user had done this type of thing with their DBA account, that would have been logged under our privileged user monitoring logging that was going on. So, again, difficult to catch, and it was only when we were able to look at the volume of logs and all of the data and compare it to what other users were doing and what this user had done previously. Here's another one. This is a situation where we found some account sharing going on. Now, we all know account sharing is not good, right? Sharing is not caring. We don't like to, you know, using other people's accounts. But it happens. And, you know, people come to work and they're just trying to do their job and they don't have access to something, and you know what? We talked to security, we talked to the Active Directory guys, and you know, it's going to be 2 more weeks before I get the access. I need this today. I got a project I'm working on. And so pretty soon everybody's sharing accounts. So this was some analysis we did of, we've got some accounts here across the bottom, users identified as ABC all the way up through L. And we looked at, and there's 2 different databases here, one on the top half and one on the bottom half. These are 2 different databases. And so we looked at how users were actually accessing these databases. We found that A and B, these 2 accounts actually share the same privileges. Okay? Then we saw that we saw C and D actually using B's account because they didn't have the same privileges, and so this was going on. H was using the accounts of E and G. J is using the accounts of G and I. Okay? L is using the account of K. I mean, this is just going on and on and on. This is just looking again at log data and seeing this type of sharing of accounts going on. Again, no violations here, no red flags popping up because nobody's failing a login. This is all internal traffic on the network. It's not unusual. It's all coming from the LAN into the data center, that sort of thing. All very normal, except that people should be using their own account. When people are sharing other accounts, then it kind of messes with our logging, and especially with any sort of access controls that we have in place. Cloud applications. So, when we look at where users store data, we're in the business of protecting data. So when we look at where users store data, we see really about 5 different categories, but we can kind of boil it down to the databases. A lot of data is in databases still today, relational databases. Then we call that structured data. We've also got sort of semi-structured data we call big data. NoSQL, MongoDB, Cloudera, these big data platforms, okay? It's kind of semi-structured data. Then we've got unstructured data, which is just files living in file servers, file shares, etc. Then we've got cloud applications, SaaS applications, so software as a service, Office 365, Google Drive, Gmail, Dropbox, Box, Salesforce.com, I mean the list goes on and on and on. Software as a service. And now, data lives there. We've also got infrastructure as a service. You've got Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, et cetera, et cetera. So looking at SaaS applications here, and again, looking for anomaly detection. Can you identify the typical device used by this account? So here's an account, and each one of these dots indicates the device logging in using this account. And so we see up there very legitimate, very, very typical access across the top. It's regular every single day, logging in, logging in, logging in. So again, here we go, another device every single day, logging in, logging in, logging in, just fine. Down here, not every day, this person probably doesn't log in on the weekends. I aspire to be that person. And then, what's this one? Hang on a second. It's an outlier, again. Again, this comes from reading the logs, crunching the data, doing the analytics on it, and finding that anomaly that is unusual, that sticks out, that doesn't match the pattern. And so we identify this device. What was that? Well, basically, it was somebody had their account stolen, somebody shoulder surfing at Starbucks or something like that, saw them type in their password, went to their own machine, and logged in. And so that's why we see completely separate device logging in just that one time. This is more of it, anomaly detection. This is in Salesforce.com, usage patterns, and again, we're looking for the outliers, individual events that happen. Here we've got the big blocks where things are happening many, many times, nearly 100 times over and over and over again over a period of time, and we're looking for those outliers that just happened once, and then going to discover why was that, what was it that caused that, what was the issue. So it's fairly complex, but what we found out here was that we really need to have an understanding of, one, users and everything about the user. What kind of authentication they have, what their permissions are, what their role is in the organization, what device they use, what time of the day they work, what time of the days of the week they work, everything you can imagine about the user. But we also need to know about the data. We also, when we look at a user's access to the data, we need to see what type of data they typically access. What's the sensitivity rating of that data? What's the volume, the typical volume of records that are accessed? Within a database, what tables do they touch? What operations do they run? What schemas do they use? This sort of thing. Within the file share, what shares do they access? What kind of operations do they run? Do they copy and move data? How much do they copy and move? Again, with SaaS applications, the same sort of thing. So we need to understand about the users and about the data. And what we find is that when we know everything about the users and when we know everything about the data, it's at that intersection of user information and data information where we find the breach. And when we understand both, then we can catch the data breach. So what we're doing here is, here's just a few examples. When we're looking at user access, is it an application or is it an interactive user? Does this user typically go through the application or does this user typically go direct to the data source? What type of account do they use? Is this a service account that is used by an application or is it a personal account? What type of data are they accessing? Is it sensitive data? Is it business critical data? Or is it just metadata? And all of this we're talking about just relating to enterprise databases. And so we could look at the same thing when we look at applications, file servers, and SaaS applications in the cloud as well. So a bit of an eye chart here, but just some examples of what sort of data points we learned became important to catching certain types of activity. So, for example, suspicious application data access. We needed the user identity, the client IP, the server IP, the client application, the database name, the table name, the data sensitivity, the schema, the SQL operation, and the operation type. Put all that data together, and then we could tell whether it was suspicious or not. For excessive database record access, the user identity, the user department, the database name, database sensitivity, data sensitivity, table name, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, there's a lot of data points here that all come into play to helping us identify this type of internal malicious activity. So we need to know, mention this back at the beginning, we need to know who is connecting to the database, how do they typically connect to the database, what data are they accessing, do their peers access data in the same way, how much data do they access, typically when they query, and when do they usually work. When we put all this together, we start to uncover the unknown. We start to understand what's going on. So the effort to stop this data miner, we need to know the data, we need to know the users, we need to monitor them, and we need to be able to take immediate action when we identify the problem. So lastly, and then take some questions here, think about these questions. Can you answer these questions? Where specifically is your private data located? Who's accessing that data? How do they access the data? Should they have access to the data? What users have access but don't use that access? Who's responsible if the data is lost? In other words, who gets fired when the data gets stolen? Typically, it's security who's responsible, right? But who's responsible for monitoring that data? Typically not security. So there's a bit of a disconnect there that we need to solve. And then lastly, the two last questions here, these are the difficult ones. Is the data being used appropriately? And do you have anything that provides timely and actionable security intelligence? There's a lot of data in play here, and it's not an easy problem to solve. What we found out at Imperva is if we can get the right data, if we can get the right information, and if you have enough of it, put it all together and crunch the numbers, you can find the data breaches. We've put together, we've been working, we've been offering a database activity monitoring and file activity monitoring for many, many years. We've been in this business for a long time. This is new to us. This is something that that we're still working on. As you see, we've been working on some solutions here. We've also been, our CISO internally. This is a problem for us as well as any other organization. And we're a security organization. We're a security company, and you would think that our employees would know this stuff and would be careful about it, and everybody would follow best practices and not click on those phishing emails. Well, it turns out we do anyway. Okay, they got our CISO got me with the last phishing email that he sent out. Okay, I've been with the company a long time. I've been in security my whole career, but it just so happens that I've worked for the company both in the United States and overseas. This is always an issue when it comes to tax time. And so we got an email that said, there's an issue with your W-2, please contact, I'm so-and-so in the finance department, please reach out to me, there's an issue with your W-2, I'd like to get this resolved for you as quickly as possible. I thought, here we go again, I always have problems with tax time because I earned money overseas. And yeah, guess what? That same email went to everybody in the whole company, right? And it was just a phishing email, and I clicked on it just like about 40% of the employees did. So you can't patch people.
How was the signature? Was it branded or did it have generic signature?
It was branded. I didn't recognize the name of the person that the email came from, but it had the appropriate email signature and the title and a phone number and a logo and everything. And
that's the reason why at CAL FIRE our internal emails, when it does that kind of stuff, has internal branding, not external branding. So if you see an email comes in with external branding, you suspect it.
Right. That
has worked because we did get a phishing attack, but people didn't fall for it. They said the branding is suspicious.
That's good. That's good. If you can enforce that, that's mentioning a difference between internal signatures and external signatures or branding on the email. And then if it purports to be an internal email but has the wrong branding on it, then you'd be suspicious of it. And we should do that. Questions? Yes, sir.
On the earlier examples, were those targeted initiatives where we had a suspicion that we were trying to find the suspect, or was that?
Nope. So we've been working on this project. We said, look, we've been selling security products for about 15 or 16 years here, and we haven't been able to solve this problem. So let's do some research here and see if we can figure out if there's a way to solve this problem. And so we have a lot of customers out there, and some of you maybe here in the room are our customers who use our database activity monitoring or our file activity monitoring or even our cloud SaaS monitoring solution. And so we went out to these customers and said, can we have logs? Just give us, 3 months worth of log data from your Imperva appliance that's been monitoring your database activity. No suspicion of anything. But we just need, when you're trying to build something like this, you need a lot of data to work with. And so we're out there collecting data from everybody we could. We collected data from about between 20 and 25 different customers, large customers that have lots and lots of log data for us. And a pretty shocking statistic to us was that in every single one of those customers, we found a problem. And it was a severe enough problem that when we reported back and we said, we think you've got a problem. Here's the user account, or here's the machine. In every case, it resulted in either immediately pulling the machine off the network and wiping the drives, or in the case of users, it involved firing an employee. So it was actionable information every time. And it was shocking to us. I mean, these are large customers. These are Fortune 500 companies. Everybody would recognize the name, so I won't mention any of them. But, and there was a couple of governmental organizations in here as well. And, these are organizations that spend money on security, that have all the tools, that have all the anti-malware solutions and the antivirus solutions and all the firewalls and all of our stuff as well. And our web application firewalls and our database activity monitoring, file activity monitoring, and companies doing everything they possibly can. And yet, when we rolled up and said, let's give us all this log data and let us just run it through these algorithms and see if we can look for outliers when we crunch all the data together, and we found something in every single case. Question?
So after going through this project, are you able to see in the future some type of product that sort of combines all of these behavioral kind of things, or in a sense, predictive kind of?
So we've put together, a product that we're just coming out with that works with our solutions, with our database monitoring and file monitoring solutions, as well as our Skyfence, our SaaS monitoring solution, and reads our logs. What we did find out from our research, though, is that even that solution doesn't solve the whole kill chain. We used a UBA solution and a network analysis solution as well, and then when we put it with our solution, number 3, we were able to solve the entire kill chain. But the reason for our solution that we built in-house and now we're bringing to market is that that was the whole, the data access that nobody had that solution. I'm told I'm done. Thanks for coming out, and we'll be around if you have any questions.